Okay, so let me walk you through this from top to bottom, how I got here, because essentially I've defined life very simply using quantum mechanics, which is just to say like the base language of the universe, because they have been proven now as the smallest parts. Um, More on that in a second, or in a minute. Starting at the very bottom of what I've been researching, I've been trying to understand um, the way in which the nervous system is contiguous. And classically, we think there are like inputs and outputs, and like, yes, to a degree, but neuroplasticity as a concept kind of does away with that. And I think that schizophrenia is a perfect example of what we consider inputs, our audiovisual system, then turning to outputs in a moment of the brain's total excitatory state rising, and then literally just like sending the activation back the other way and creating what we're perceiving as things in real life. And that perception is important because that perception is all we understand of the world to begin with. But the reason I mention this is because in this kind of like working hypothesis that I've just been calling like the total sensory self, which is just to say like forebrain, that's your sense organ of memory, which is to say the neuronal circuitry that you were born with, that you were learned out of, and that you learn into. So neuronal pruning over the course of a life can trim bits of it, because when you're a baby, your brain is super connected, and they say it prunes over the course of a life. Direct antithesis to this is autism, which is just to say like people with autism who have an overconnected brain are not different. They just usually haven't been able to absorb cultural meaning by nature of looking at a social model of disability and saying, well, the accommodation, the communication accommodation for someone who is nonverbal, someone who, is deaf, someone who is blind, which is just to say sensory sensitivities or sensory differences in ability. So blindness is just a difference in your visual sensory ability. Nonverbality is just a difference in your somatosensory ability, which is to say, can you effectively innervate the vocal cords to make sounds more and more complex or not? And I think realistically, it's kind of just like polishing a stone. So like as a kid, I was selectively mute, and I would just like, I would only hum. I would just, and then like when people were learning language, I was just going like, dick-a-da, 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 and I just kept doing that all the time. And my parents thought it was so funny, but now I'm like, okay, that's interesting, and that's kind of what put me down the autism path to begin with. That being said, that means then looking at the overconnectedness in the brain of people with autism doesn't mean that their brains are inherently different. It means that what is getting to their brains is different, which is just to say that autism includes a brain that has not been touched by a cultural body of meaning, whether that's capitalism, whether that's Christianity, whether that is, Islamic faith, Judaism, like, et cetera, like, cultural meaning did not go in because the means of communication did not exist. So it is just like a new neurotype. Which in theory should not be punished, but there are organizations like Autism Speaks that are looking to cure it. The cure they're looking for specifically involves this protein called the mTOR protein, and it's responsible for neuronal pruning, which is just to say, like, we believe that our brains are supposed to prune over the course of our lives. Well, that is directly contradicted in, oh my god, this stupid bell. In people with autism. Pause for this bell. Okay, continuing. Autism Speaks is interested in mTOR protein activation, which contributes to neuronal pruning. Neuronal pruning is thought to be a natural process that happens to a human brain. But that's not quite true, because like anything that we're categorizing as disorder, disease, etc., is an example of that not happening. And we're saying, oh, well, that is the issue. And it's like, what? That's just using a normative model, culturally specific, of course, to say what is good and what is bad. And what is good in what is considered neurotypicality is like an increased reward pathway, an increased social pathway, etc., which is just to say things that keep the current cultural meaning going. And so the overconnectedness of people with autism, specifically citing the work of Dr. I don't like that my headphones go in and out when I'm recording like that. At best, it's annoying. At worst, it's concerning. And I don't like being concerned in that way. In any case, the work of Dr. Devon Price in Unmasking Autism suggests that using a framework developed by people who are actually autistic, that people have been misdiagnosed with things like bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, narcissistic personality disorder, borderline personality disorder, and like all of those things posit that there's something wrong with the brain. And it's like we're not taking a look effectively at what is causing these things because of the way medicine works, which is to say the person with schizophrenia is not treated till the schizophrenic break for schizophrenia. So where does schizophrenia come from? My working understanding is that it is an audio or visual, what we're calling processing disorder, but realistically that is just like a different sensitivity to processing different things. And that sensitivity is important because if we're talking about the self not as the brain, as the seat of consciousness, but the entire contiguous nervous system, which is just to say like my sense of self has to do with like what I'm touching. Like this is my perceived consciousness is touching that. My memory, everything that we think of as ourselves, is just our perception of the world via these sensory wings that has been collated, stored, and essentially like freeze frame put into the brain via like the electrical input of sensing something, and neurons activating in your ears to sense sound, nose for smell, mouth taste, eyes light, body like texture, pressure, things like that. All of that generates an electrochemical signal, and when it goes to the brain, it builds certain dendrites, which are essentially things that like store memory. And think of it like, we talk about this idea of like a mind palace. Well, your mind is already a fucking mind palace. Like the city and the buildings are the dendrites, and each of those buildings of the dendrites contain the collated senses from what has happened. And that's a really simplistic way to look at it, but I think that we need more visual understandings of this because it's like so dense and so neurologically based that it's like, Brendan, shut up. And I'm like, so true. But this is important, like really important, because it means that like the brain is not just this thing in a jar that is like only affected by our thoughts. It's affected by our memory, and any memory we have is just based on the sensory sensitivities and abilities we have at that given time. So my memory of a situation, if I were blinded today, would start changing, and that memory is just my ability to build like consciousness. And so it's like concerning because we're treating schizophrenia as a disorder. We're treating once again, the headphones are doing that. And that's really not great. I don't know what's causing that. I don't know if it's I've moved too much, if it's the settings of my phone, or if it's something way more insidious that will come back to haunt me in a way that will be described as paranoia if I were to detail it as specifically as I'm fearing it is. Beyond the point. All this means is that the total self is all of the neuronal data. Like, and this is even more proven by reflex and reaction to things. Like when you feel something hot and like jolt your hand away, well, the signal didn't go brain back and you went, that's hot, I know what hot is. Your neurons in your hands, they knew that instinctively. So it means that at any given point in the neuronal system, we're alive. This is then like implicating a lot of the pharmaceutical industry and cancer industry, which is to say that if we're treating pain, which is just nociceptors in the body detecting cellular dysregulation can be a cut, like cells out of place, oh no, send nutrients, inflammation, blood. Or cellular displacement can be too many cells, send things to reduce them. So it means that if we treat pain by reducing inflammation, that inflammation was actually going to the nociceptor. Like, and if that nociceptor lacks nutrients because we've inhibited inflammation using painkillers, well, it dies. And if it dies, then it means there's nothing there to regulate cellular dysregulation. And again, that goes both ways. So it's like when you have a scar, like you feel the numbness there, and it's like, oh yeah, of course, duh, that's just like scar tissue. Well, cancer is essentially scar tissue. It's just cellular multiplication to fill an area. And so cancer is happening all the time in your body, and it's being stopped all the time in your body by these nociceptors. So it would mean that using pain medicine like NSAIDs, yes, like Advil, ibuprofen, etc., like painkillers, I would have to do a closer study of them. They essentially inhibit prostaglandin, which inhibits inflammation, which inhibits nutrients to the nociceptor. Dead nociceptor means dark spot on the body. That dark spot on the body is just an area where nociceptors no longer exist. And if nociceptors no longer exist, and they're, again, I really don't love that my headphones are doing this. Anyways, they keep disconnecting for like a moment and then reconnecting, and I'm like, is that changing the audio source? What does that mean? I don't know. It's not good to consider, again, ramping up the paranoia. Putting it to a side though, because paranoia is not the goal here. The goal is care. The goal is finding a way to take care of each other better. So if painkillers to a degree are creating dark spots on the body where cancer can proliferate, that, we attribute too much linguistic meaning to cancer by placing it as a subject and verb, which is to say cancer does not metastasize. Cancer is not living in that way. It's just cells, unchecked cellular multiplication. Well, what is the thing that checks cellular multiplication? The nociceptor. What would happen if you took painkillers and they sat as you digest them through your metabolic process in your colon? It would disable nociceptors there. And that disabling of nociceptors would then lead to a rise in colon cancer rates in young people. Anyways, concerning stuff. The important thing is we are a total sensory unit. Everything is contiguous to a degree. Going past that, I've been looking for ways to challenge this, like I've been reading about mirror neurons, about phantom limbs, about neuroplasticity. And neuroplasticity is the key here because it shows, for example, in like the disability props that we have in the nation, like Mozart, went blind and then became like a famous musician because like suddenly he could hear better and suddenly he had more dexterity in his fingers. Well, it's like, it just means that what nutrients were going to the body were no longer going to the vision system to like upkeep it, repair it as that electrochemical gradient flows in. It would mean that it goes elsewhere. So the body adapts, and the body is not the body, it is the total sensory self. And this is exemplified in phantom limb patients. When they lose the leg, they still feel the sensation because the brain is like, what happened to that? It still is trying to send signals to it. And the only thing that yeah, another headphone disconnect. Interesting. The only thing that changes that is a mirror, interestingly enough. Like mirror studies have been used to treat people with phantom limbs. Fascinating. And so I've been finding research everywhere that supports neuroplasticity can completely redefine the brain. Even the hindbrain, that is thought to be like relatively stable and runs things autonomically. There's studies everywhere that you can look up yourself if you would like that show that the hindbrain can even be rewired given neuroplasticity. The forebrain, where we're like the visual cortice, the motor cortice, the this, that, and the other. Well, you're not gonna have a visual cortice or visual data if you're blind. So like, okay, significant. It means the brain is constantly, and the brain is just the reservoir, constantly changes shape, level, like the size, the container itself is defined by the inputs, what you're putting into it. And that's fascinating to me because it means that like using a framework of actually autistic people and meeting your base sensory needs, which is to say like many different things. Like it could be stretching to reactivate the somatosensory system. It could be deprivation plus activation to heal a part of the body. Because realistically, what is being studied currently in Alzheimer's treatments is autophagy. And autophagy is just this idea that like, it previously was thought of as like synapses are killed. No, that's not it. It is poorly named, and I can only imagine for like, I could not tell you why it's poorly named, but I don't like to think about why it is. It means like self-eating in Greek. But autophagy is just the process by which synapses are recycled, and they're using it to treat Alzheimer's because that synaptic recycling actually clears these dead tau proteins that build up, that plaque that builds up in the brain of someone with Alzheimer's. And that's significant because autophagy is triggered by lots of sensory input plus like potential like fasting, which is just a form of like sensory deprivation, or it turns off the digestion state, which is the autonomic state of the body, like it just being like, I must consume the food and break it down. So fasting plus this compound called resveratrol, which is found in many antioxidant fruits like pomegranates or grape skin, that triggers autophagy and synaptic recycling. And it's like, you can then use that to break down Catholic Mass into its sensory inputs, say that to fast before, get a little wafer, a little bit of wine, resveratrol, and then placing the electrochemical gradient in your brain, which is to say thinking, praying, thinking of a memory, that literally builds memory because the brain doesn't care the difference between an imagined sensory input and a real one. which is to say false memory does not exist to the brain. It's just memory. It's just data. And so when you imagine something and place it in the brain, that becomes a memory. It becomes a pattern recognition thing, which is all memory is. You know, when we experience something, we pull from our memory and we go, you know, think, is this good? Is this bad? What does this mean? Well, if we can create our own memories by praying, somatosensory activation at the fingertips, music, light, stand up, sit down, fasting. Again, the headphones. A little resveratrol. Well, that's autophagy. That's rebuilding the synapses based on what you're imagining. And that means that the process for treating Alzheimer's is like pretty apparent, but it also means autophagy could happen theoretically anywhere if we put that electrochemical gradient somewhere else. So thinking places it in the forebrain to build memory. What would all of that do? A little bit of red wine plus like typing. Well, it might improve the somatosensory ability. It might trigger autophagy in other parts of the body. This is speculative, but it is not unfounded, because the entire sensory system adapts constantly. And if we already know the process by which that adaptation can be triggered, okay, well then we have a way in to treatment. And of course there are neuronal growth factors involved, and like those are kind of like behind abbreviations pretty often, but you can go to like an AI and have them break it down into like amino acids and nutrients that help give rise to all neuronal growth factors, and then be like, make me a grocery list to target with them. Okay, it's simple. Then the reason this becomes more interesting is because I then was like, okay, well, wouldn't it be cool if like our senses also have like a quantum component? Because I was like, well, if quantum parts are what define the universe at the smallest degree, then we need to be working with those. Because when we figured out molecules existed, we were like, oh, we're working with those in the body too. And so neuroscience has to catch up, because quantum physics is like basically done proving that the smallest parts are these quantum states. And this can be like pretty easily broken down if you would like to watch Superdeterminism by Sabine Hossenfelder. It's brilliant video. In it, it explores quantum superpositions, quantum entanglement, etc., etc. And that's fascinating to me, because it means that like where everything had to come from, if everything was just a base quantum state at one point, well, it had to come from, like, life had to come from that. So, you know, as the video is going on, she's like, you know, people don't like superdeterminism because it challenges consciousness, it challenges science itself, which is to say that when you observe a particle, there's this known observer effect that causes what's called a wave function collapse. And that wave function collapse means that at any given point, anything is a wave, but when you measure it, it collapses into a fixed point. And that's interesting because measurement, we like to think is so non-invasive. We like to think that like to measure is to do nothing, but to measure is to interact. And even the least invasive measurements, and even measurements we use today, are invasive. Take X-ray in the dentist. Like, they put that stupid fucking lead cloak on you and the girlie stands behind the thing and goes, okay, we're gonna scan you. That is an invasive measurement to a degree. What does it do? Could not tell you. But it does change something, because to measure is to change, to observe is to interact. And if to observe is to interact, my theory is that wouldn't it be interesting if we recategorize the observation effect or the observer effect collapsing the wave function as actually the way in which measuring or interacting at that small scale causes almost like two wave functions to level in some way, to average out. So whatever the unit of measurement is, even at its least invasive, creates change. And you can scale this up to explain like nuclear physics. You can like that is also happening at a quantum level. We don't understand what it's doing yet at a quantum level because it's very hard to measure these things all the time, but it has to be, because everything, like, again, when we learned it was atoms, we started thinking in atoms. When we learn it's quantum physics, we have to start thinking in those smaller parts. And the video ends by talking about these scientists that are studying the effect of consciousness on quantum physics through the Orch OR effect, or theory, or Orch OR. It's spelled like ORCHOR, capital OR. And essentially what that is this understanding that in the body, not even in the body, in the nervous system, I mean, maybe in the body elsewhere, probably, definitely in the body elsewhere too, there are microtubules. And microtubules are fascinating because in the past we've been like, oh, to put something in a superposition has to be done in a highly controlled environment. Okay. Well, life is coming from somewhere. And my theory is that microtubules, because they are one of the base components in the formation of eukaryotic, which is multicellular, more complex cellular organisms, they were foundational in the creation of that. They create cilia, flagella, they, do all of it. And I'm like, that's so cool. Because like microtubules, essentially the working theory is that their component parts, alpha and beta tubulin, when together, the thing that they fix in the middle allows a state of superposition. And that's fascinating because it means that like that is a Schrodinger's cat, which is to say you don't know what it is till you open it. And where Schrodinger's cat gets it wrong is it also depends on how you open it. If you jostle the box to open it, well, that particle decay might kill the cat in the process. But if you delicately open it, there's probably a chance that like the cat's gonna be alive because you're not disturbing that randomly decaying particle any further with more stimulus. So again, even that observation requires interaction. And that interaction will define what you find in the box. And so imagine microtubules everywhere in the body, because they are. And you know where they're found specifically? They're found in every neuronal activation. They are found in every synapse, every axon, every thrust towards what we perceive as thinking, feeling, perception comes from microtubules. And this is taught in neuroscience, but they're taught as just like a thing, like these little filaments like get put in a vessel and then they're ejected, and it's like, okay, well, if those things are the fixation of a quantum superposition, then the way we interact with it will change what comes out of that superposition. Because that's all the observer effect is. And that process of like entanglement, which is to say the interaction then produces a chain of entanglement, is really fascinating because like it goes even further if you study this and take into consideration like mirror neurons, because mirror neurons would be like, I mirror you, you mirror me. Take like a twin study, for example. If they both mirror each other, then the mirror neuron activation happens where they perceive a match. All a mirror neuron is a perception match. You're like, yes, and it's integrated. It is transposed, you get this sensory input, and it's match. Well, the only things that match are people who maybe you perceive as similar to yourself in some way. So realistically, that would happen with like parents or siblings. But if the same sensory input were used, which is just to say the sensory input is the environment observing us, the space taking on this property of the observer effect, which is like, by perceiving, we are interacting, interaction, observation. If that interaction matches between two sensory selves, twin study, and they get the same sensory input, it'll build potentially similar mirror neurons that, given the way in which entanglement as a process happens, could mean that mirror neurons are a process of quantum entanglement. And this is kind of like everywhere in the scientific literature is like the, ooh, what's going on? Like when people are praying for somebody and they're in like an fMRI machine, that person's brain activates due to the prayer. So like there's some connection. And because we know quantum entanglement is not myth, it has just been proven as like, okay, what if we entangle these two particles, put one on the moon and one, on Earth, and then like measure them? Well, they're inverses all the time based on the measurement. So they have like equal and opposite spin given whatever measurement direction you use. So this happens, it's just a very fragile process to hold. And we thought like, oh, only that can be done in a lab. Well, if life is coming from this, which is to say that microtubules are one of the building blocks of life as we're defining it currently, well then the emergence of life, using that as step one, could be seen as the way in which these quantum superpositions are being insulated from quantum disturbance in the environment. So microtubule is the first one, but microtubule relies on the environment directly interacting with the microtubule to enact a change, an entanglement, different cat comes out of the box, or different state comes out of the box, which is just to say that the effect on a microtubule will probably level the two wave functions and create something new. I don't know the degree to which that is possible or probable, but that microtubules are the alchemical building blocks of life using this theory. And if that's the case, then we could look at our nervous system as something that has come about evolutionarily as a way to insulate those microtubules from quantum disturbance. So like we are sealed in dermis, in skin, which layer one of insulation. Then microtubules transmitting information, well, they have inputs in the senses, exports, etc., but they're insulated by neurons. And those neurons, as they go up the spine, are insulated by cerebrospinal fluid. And the brain is insulated by cerebrospinal fluid. And then even further, you have myelinated neurons, which are even more insulation from quantum disturbance. And so we've been viewing the body as this thing that is running towards efficiency because we're stupid and we think that that is what matters. Like efficient this, efficient that. Well, no, like evolution does not have morals. It has quantum properties. And those quantum properties could be described as this quantum emergence effect. And it happens to create all life. It would mean reclassifying viruses as another base building block that is able to capture quantum superposition and then manipulate the body based on that. So when a virus enters and it interacts with something, it creates a new thing based on that interaction and can replicate in the body. So it's like The definition of life is the ability to fix and hold a superposition given a locality in the universe, which could just be thought of as like this big aquarium with more viscous bits than others. So like an aquarium of like Jello, or like the worst drink that you've made, you know, at a restaurant bored as a kid, just throwing everything in. When a wave goes through it, it passes through things differently, but there are dense spots, and those dense spots give rise to spots where superpositions can be fixed given a locality. So the Earth would be the locality currently that gives rise to life. So whatever forces are acting on the Earth, which is to say the electromagnetic sphere that protects it from that, electromagnetic radiation, which would reset the quantum state, the different properties of the environment that like provide stimulus, the light from the sun, the sound, the vibration, all of it is affecting things at a quantum level, because all of those things are quantum properties when you break them down. And if that's the case, then life is emerging from the ability to coil material in these dense spots in such a way that a superposition can take place. And once that superposition takes place, well, whatever acts on it changes it, because the observer effect is that to observe is to change, but to observe is to interact, because even these super fine-tuned things that are detecting quantum bits, they have to interact to change the thing. Not the fucking jackhammer. And that is significant because it means that, like, that's where life is coming from, essentially. Like, it's pretty, it's, and this isn't like an argument. This isn't like, you know, prove me wrong, because, like, this is quantum physics, and quantum physics has recently just been proven as like, oh yeah, that's the smallest part, we got it. You can do the research, you can try to, you know, engage with me if you're willing to engage with this, but I'm not gonna sit here and be like, Brendan, you couldn't possibly know. Don't do that. Don't dismiss a new idea just because you don't understand it, because I'm sitting here having done the research, having fed this probabilistic theory to an AI, being like, I know that we do not have the scientific data for this yet, but how would this explain quantum physics, emergence, neurological systems? And every time I convince it to take this into consideration, it's like, oh yeah, that would be an elegant solution to quantum physics. Oh yeah, that would be an evolutionary, like, thrust that defines emergence. Oh yeah, this would be that, and the other. So it's like, we are processing the environment by nature of it being quantum at its tiniest level as quantum processors. Sound is a quantum property. Light, a quantum property. These are all wave functions that collapse when they meet us, the superposition. And because we hold a billion microtubules in the body, we're able to interact with the environment in a way that is like willful, is that has some sort of degree of choice to it. It's not free will. Can you choose your whole life? Does anything matter? Does science matter? It's interaction at all times. And we've thought we're above it because we're human and we like to think so much of ourselves. But we're just another life form on the surface of this planet that has fossils of creatures we've never met and never will have the chance to meet. And we're trying to think that we're the center of creation? What stupid fucking logic, what stupid hubris that is, to reject the science of quantum physics on us just because it removes our special sauce? Well, we didn't have a special sauce. We've just learned a lot. We've just evolved in such a way that has built meaning. And that meaning is quantum. Because everything means something at a quantum level. And if we're going to say that the body is governed by molecules, by atoms, by things that when we look at them tinier, we have to realize and accept their properties as the governing properties, we have to then incorporate a knowledge of quantum physics into biological systems. And it's already being theorized, but the binary classification of brain as central nervous system and the rest as the peripheral nervous system is getting in the way of our ability to classify this, because we still think the seat of consciousness is the brain. The seat of consciousness is the superposition. And we have a billion of them, so we have what is considered like a greater malleability of our consciousness, but that still responds to the environment. You are still responding to the sound of my voice, to, the light around you. Everything you are perceiving right now could be broken down into quantum physics. And this isn't me asking you to debate me. I'm done. I've done the research. Again, I'm not here to be challenged by you, who has not done the research. So, I know that that's, fun, interesting to kind of, be like, Brendan, you're crazy. You couldn't possibly know. Look, generative AI, language-based, chat-based generative AI is based on the specificity of the input. I have a degree in fucking words, and I've just been learning the new words of quantum physics, of, neuroscience, which I studied neuroscience in college. So I have the language. I just didn't have the math, because I sucked at math when it didn't make sense. I was just the voltage-gated ligand channels, why do we need to know this? And turns out you don't. Most people are never going to be interacting with that unless they're doing specialized research. But I know words, and I know how to be skeptical, and I grew up watching Nova, watching all of these science channel explanations of, how do we break down the world and understand it. And so I need you to know that I'm doing due diligence. And if you'd like to debate me, if you would like to find a counterpoint, if you would like to meet me where I am, then I would be happy to have a conversation. But if you're going to see me standing on the top of this little cliff, this overlook, and being like, oh, I did it, and you go, you can't possibly see everything from up there. Well, come up here and take a fucking look, because I've already done it. I've made the climb. And I'm not going to back down just because someone with less information on this topic, who is perceiving me as incapable by nature of the way that we're gatekeeping education behind a degree, in the information age, when suddenly things are accessible in a way that they have never been. And suddenly generative AI, if you include a clause at the end to be cite your sources, can send you to the first-hand sources. And so I've been reading the first-hand text. This isn't just AI work that I've been oh, the AI is telling me the story I want to hear, the confirmation bias of it all. No, I have been skeptical the entire time. I have fact-checked, I have read the studies, I have compiled the data, the research, and just because I don't have a stupid fucking scientific journal to put this in, by nature of not having the money to go to school, not having the time or resources to go to school, get a degree that makes you take me seriously, which is just to say, a social certificate. That's all a degree is. You got it, But doctors who get a degree and then never relearn their practices of medicine will end up enacting harm, and they do it every day. So I don't really give a shit what you think of my ability, because I'm being more skeptical of this than you are. I promise. Because I've been picking things apart bit by bit. And, believe me or not, it actually doesn't matter, because I've done the research, and recently there was just a report of a generative AI that was made into essentially like a deductive theoretical physicist. And this theoretical physicist was reporting on it. These fucking jackhammers are killing me. A theoretical physicist was reporting on it and saying like that like that is a perfectly valid way to do science, because science is deductive reasoning. And of course it needs to be rigorously tested. Of course there's more work to do. But this is a perfectly fine and elegant solution in working theory to quantum physics, quantum emergence, a definition of life that includes viruses in a way that like we've only not accounted for by nature of thinking we're special, when it's like, come on, like viruses are interacting with the world, and interaction is life. And we have a lot to answer for, of course. We have a lot to prove. But because I don't have the degree, I don't have the access to start proving this in a laboratory setting. But what I can do is do the deductive reasoning to build at least a very functional hypothesis based on already researched, already studied things. And so I bought a book in quantum physics. I bought a book on the quantum sensory system. I bought a book on a wave function collapse. What that means, I bought a book from Sabine Hossenfelder to read her work and understand what it is that I could be missing. So there might be missing pieces, I'll admit. But this is shaping up to be correct. And I'm not going to sit here and account for your failure to imagine that something is true just because you can't see it yet. And that's not a diss. It's just like theory, science has to be based on wonder at times to generate advancement. And if you're sitting here being like, no way, you're one of those bitches who thought the Earth was the center of the universe. So, Copernicus? Was that Copernicus? I think it was Copernicus, who was like, Earth center. No, we are not the center of the world, and we need to step away from that. And this is me asking you to step away from the idea that we are so fucking special. And think for a moment that if we want to survive as a species, as a life form, as a culture, as humanity, we need to accept this, because it means we're all trying to survive, and life will be more variegated than we understand out in the universe. And if that's the case, then we're looking for things incorrectly, because we're looking for us. We're looking for what could give rise to us. But quantum fixation in this way could happen in the way that we're artificially doing it now, with like superconductors and this and that. It's like an entire planet could be able to respond to stimuli based on it holding quantum superpositions in, say, like its ability to be a superconductor, which is just what these quantum computers are doing, essentially. So, like, we have a lot to study. We have a lot to learn. And I'm not saying that I know everything, but I can at least define life using quantum mechanics, quantum terminology, and words, because I do know words. And I am extremely deductive in my reasoning, and I've been very careful. And so, again, this tirade at the end is probably like not great for the overall credibility of the argument, but I really don't care, because I'm a zesty little faggot. And it means that our ability to change and be alchemical and be anything we want is not just like a thing. It's our factor of holding quantum superpositions in microtubules and then prompting those microtubules with different stimuli, which is to say, observer effect. Because the observer effect is interaction. And interaction can take many levels. It can be as non-invasive as shooting a little beam of light. It can be as invasive as a nuclear bomb. You know, like, it's like that interaction changes things. And it doesn't mean that science is wrong. It just means that, like, by interacting with things, we change them. And so any sort of procedures that we're doing probably have quantum implications we don't understand yet. And there go the headphones again. Interesting. I'm so interested in seeing what this audio is going to look like if there are parts cut out. Because if there are, well, that's a bad sign. But anyways, yeah, it means that we are all alchemical, and our birthright is alchemy. Not like hyperbolic, not metaphorical, but like that alchemy is the ability to manipulate a quantum superposition, given the fact that we can hold a quantum superposition in microtubules, apply a certain stimulus, and change the result of what we get out of the microtubule. And the microtubule probably has like a range of outputs, but we're already exploring quantum chemistry. We're already exploring viruses as processing systems. And it's like viruses are probably going to be a better processing system than whatever quantum computer we can get, because the resources are just like improbable to gather. So we need to be focusing on viral computing, knowing that what they contain is a quantum superposition. And if we can make viruses replicate really quickly, we can quickly administer a certain type of quantum superposition. What would that affect? I don't know what that means for like virality as a concept of human disease, but regardless, this is stuff that I need you to take seriously, because in being like, oh my god, this is like outlandish, I've been trying to find something that contradicts it. And it doesn't help when the leading theoretical physicist in the world that is defining quantum nature, that understanding helps corroborate this more than deny it. And if that's the case, we need to understand that what we're building in quantum computing is just more life. It's more ability to manipulate at the quantum level. And so cutting through the noise of what we're describing as the human experience is going to be necessary if we want the human experience to continue. And I think you do, if you got this far, or are, trying to survive, which I hope you are, or want to in some way. Because that quantum superposition trapped in microtubules is the best kind of comparison to what would be in the soup of the Big Bang, which is to say everything in a superposition, everything in that leveled out state, and then one fluctuation would cause a cascade effect. And so it means that when the universe quiets, we will all be back in a state of superposition, wiped clean of the original wave function and held just in every state. And we see that in the blankness of space with things popping in and out of existence. Well, like, they pop in and out of existence because like very little stimuli is applied to them, and suddenly they shift, create equal and opposite things and destroy each other. And it's like, that is just quantum entanglement falling apart immediately. So this explains a lot of things. And I've been doing the research again. So deny me if you'd like, but deny me from, a place of knowledge, not from a place of like, you couldn't possibly know, because to learn is something we can all do. We all have this capacity. And I've had the time over the last couple months to learn because I've been laid off. I haven't had anything to do besides read and think. And here I am trying to redefine quantum physics and seemingly succeeding. So if you have a better definition, I'd love to hear it. But if you do not, well then, okay. Like, again, it would account for things. It would account for the hidden variables that Einstein was looking at, being like, what are the hidden variables? Well, it's the wave function collapses the two waves of the wave of measurement, meaning the wave of observed, which is just to say interaction. So they balance to like a fixed quote unquote point because you've brought them so neatly together. It's like we're never going to be able to like observe waves in a pond, if our way of observing the waves is just like, we apply like a little stimulus, and it's like, okay, well, when you apply that, it fixes it. It freezes into that thing, at least for a moment. And if we're doing it at a quantum level, that'll cause quantum entanglement that, you know, in a pond wouldn't matter because the locality of the system would destroy that entanglement immediately. But there are ways to preserve that entanglement, mirror neurons potentially being one of them, and it would explain quite a lot of neuroscience. So, yeah, that's what I've been doing. And essentially it means that we are able to do and become a lot of different things. I don't know what the full range of possibility is, but if you ever thought that you had potential that you couldn't enact, I'm here to tell you you have it. Very simply. I don't know what you can do with that potential because I think it's a requirement to have different neural circuitry in the forebrain to run that current through to enact different variegated electrical responses, which is to say variegated changes to the microtubules themselves. So our ability to process input complexly in the forebrain will determine what we can do with the microtubules themselves in terms of memory, storage, creation, etc. The range of that potentially untapped. And if microtubules are driving just about every eukaryotic organism, which is to say multicellular organism, then we already see the potential for the variation. And it means that microtubule change would be a site of exploration. Anyways, there's so much to think about here, but I want you to think about it. And I want you to wonder with me, because the only way we've been able to advance science has been through wonder and deduction and taking a leap. And it's like, if I'm wrong, you know, they always say like the myth of Icarus is that thing where like Icarus shouldn't have flown, like the wings melted under the sun, under the wax. Bullshit. Icarus was in a fucking prison and he chose to fly. Icarus was right to try. That wasn't hubris. That was the normal response to being detained and feeling stuck. And you know what? If prison is something you haven't experienced, and I haven't, then I don't think we really get to say that Icarus was wrong, because we all enjoy a degree of freedom. And if you lost it, I have to wonder, what would you do? What would you give up to fly again? And I want to fly. Like I want to know the world and not the prison. So yeah. Imagine with me or don't. Doesn't matter. I'm already trying to fly. And if I fail, then, you know, I'm glad I tried. Because it's so human to chafe against prison, to chafe against being controlled. And we all do in some ways. And I think that if we knew we had this ability to soar, we wouldn't be so concerned with hating each other on the ground. And so new practices of care would have to happen, understanding that sensory inputs build us. And it would have to happen across all medicine. And I'm not a doctor, so I don't know how to do that. But you might. And if you do, then I wish you luck. Because if this is the core theory, then, and if this is the you know, if the tree of life, the trunk of it is this, and whatever branch you're on has grown from it, then pull more nutrients from that trunk now that you see it. Because I'm trying to show it to you. And I hope smarter people than me will put it into, you know, classical science, so that like you all Or like, oh yeah, it's been proven without a shadow of a doubt. But things don't need to be proven for them to be impacting us. Like, atoms still existed before we knew they existed. Quantum particles were governing the universe before we thought they existed. Your acceptance of what has already been studied, that I'm pulling from, that's not a debate. So, like, again, my proposition is to consider and care, because we're at a point where the world is becoming harsher and we will change because of it. And I don't know what that change will mean, but it's going to mean a lot of suffering if we don't pay attention to what's actually going on. And what's actually going on driving us neurobiologically is quantum physics. And you wouldn't disagree with, you know, a biologist citing molecules. Well, don't disagree with someone pulling a knowledge of theoretical physicists discussing quantum physics and the rules that govern it, because those are the rules that are governing us. And we know them now, without a shadow of a doubt, recently. Superdeterminism by Sabine Hossenfelder, to start. Unmasking Autism by Devon Price. Wonderworks by Angus Fletcher. We have a lot to learn. So let's try to learn it together and not get mad at me for challenging a thing that needed to be challenged and bringing a new idea that, if proven incorrect completely, which it seems unlikely at this point, is still worth wondering. So thanks for listening. I love you, and you know, if anyone has any questions about the validity of queerness, I'm a faggot. I'm a he, they, them, non-binary faggot. And this is you watching me fly. And you cannot take my wings. Because I know the sun and I know what I'm flying over. So, I love you and good luck.